Up next on Inspiring Beauty and Believers.
As African American men and women, we think counseling is crazy. I
Mm,
don't know who came up with the idea. I don't know who came up with the idea. Like they said, I'm not going to marriage counseling. I'm not going to no kind of counseling. I'm not marrying you if we don't go to marriage counseling. So I don't understand how all these people married, but now I understand how all these people divorced
right.
because you didn't have marriage counseling. You didn't understand the triggers, the issues, the misconcept of life. And so that's how we got to handle these conversations and situations. We got to deal with the issue itself. And so having those conversations. So it's definitely up to us to change the cycle, um, and just help others along the way. Because it's definitely a cycle that needs to be stopped immediately. And especially now with this pandemic, I think I've experienced more cases of misunderstanding of domestic violence than I've had ever experienced in the last year, in 10 years.
Uh-huh.
They said the numbers have gone up because now you have people who are in close proximity with each other all day, 24/7.
Every day.
And so now people are highly triggered, and it's just exploding. And I've heard of many people getting divorced during this time and exposing different things that nobody knew. You thought, all these years these people were happy together because social media make you think they happy, but lock them in the house together for a couple months, they can't go nowhere.
6 months.
You might find out they don't even like each other at all.
I don't even like you. But that's what it is. It's like you really realize, especially during this pandemic, if you really like somebody, if you and your husband going strong still right now, it's amazing. And you know that God has chosen him to be with you now. Because if we would have been with that same person that started all this abuse during this if the pandemic happened then, they might be talking about our memory. Because we wouldn't be here. We definitely wouldn't be here.
Somebody else's memory.
Right.
Yeah.
She said, because I'm gonna kill somebody.
Somebody
ain't gonna be me.
I'll be in jail. Jesus.
So my other question is, so overcoming those things and being able to, heal or at least, develop so that you draw better relationships. How do you now deal with triggers that you may still have? Like, maybe because all of you are married, so maybe your spouse does something and it just triggers something in you that happened long ago, and it has nothing to do with, like, they not about to put their hands on you, they not even screaming at you or whatever the case may be, but it triggers something because of the trauma that you've gone through before. How do you deal with that and help yourself to be like, this is not that same situation, I don't have to be on alert, I don't have to duck and cover? How do you deal with that?
Well, I'm gonna attack this one first. My husband is a yeller. My husband, he's getting better at it as I've been honest with him about what I've experienced in my life and relationships. And I'll quiet myself real quick. And again, I'm not there. And it's not like he's yelling at me. He could be yelling about something, or just maybe he's watching TV and his voice gets elevated or something, and then I kind of go and I'll look at him and I'm like, babe, you're really loud. Like, now he'll go outside when he's having these conversations because he like to talk loud. He's not trying to hurt me or trying to do anything. He just like to talk loud. So I'm like, bro, you need to go outside. And then he'll go outside in this neighborhood we live in. I'm like, babe, please don't be scaring the people. Don't scare the people. Go walk down the street, because he praying in tongues all like, and just loud. And it just, because I've been in homes where there's yelling and been in those abusive relationships, it does make me feel some type of way. But when I just talk to him and tell him, you got to open up your mouth and let whoever it is that you would know, hey, this is how this impacts me. This is how it makes it feel. I know you're not doing this to me, but I just want to let you know. So he is more mindful of it. and he'll try to like lower his tone, or if we are having a serious conversation, because sometimes we have very serious conversations where there gets some elevation in the conversation, and he'll see me, I'll close my eyes, because what I've learned through going through counseling is I try to take myself out of it. So but at that point in time, I'm somewhere on the beach in Hawaii, or I'm hiking or something, like I don't know, that's what I do to cope with it. That's what helps me, because I didn't opt for the medication. I just opt for the yoga or working out or something like that. And he'll see my whole demeanor and stuff changes. And then I'll notice his voice gets lower and lower and lower. And once it gets at a tone to where I can respond appropriately, then I will open up my eyes and we'll continue the conversation. And he'll apologize, or I'll apologize if there's a misunderstanding. And then we'll go ahead and continue the conversation.
My husband, his stature is very similar to my first husband. He is 6'3", 300 pounds, same as my first husband. So I told him, my husband was my friend. My husband was my protector from my first husband when I was going through the divorce, and my ex-husband was breaking into my house. My husband was there. He was the one walking around my home. So my husband got like a sneak peek to how I was going to need to be treated. So he is very quick. If we start to argue, he's very quick to sit down and not stand over me. And that is something that I told him, if we start to argue, I need you to not come close to me. Don't come at me rapidly, and sit down. Because if you come at me rapidly, I know the hit is going to follow. I know I'm about to get it. And my husband he is not a yeller. He is extremely patient. We have been together going on 5 years, and I think he's yelled at me once in our entire marriage. And I spent a lot of that evening walking away from him. And so I am the one that will escalate. I am the one that will yell. I am the one that will automatically say, this isn't working out. I see something in you. So I have had to be careful that I'm not putting my husband into the abuser box, because he is not that man. So I have had to also tell him, I think I might be flashing back. I think I might be putting you into a box. I need a minute. And that minute may be 3 or 4 days. I don't love you any less. I just need to examine the situation, because sometimes these flashbacks will last days for me, and I don't even realize what I'm going through. And then I will think back, oh, that client said that, and I went right into dissociation, and now I'm right back to that scared little girl that I was 20 years ago at this point. And so I have done a lot of communicating with my husband. My husband knows what I have gone through. My husband knows what triggers me. He knows that there are anniversary dates. I left both of my ex-husbands on November 1st. So he knows when October, November comes around that I am going to be a different person. I have looked at anniversary dates. I was almost killed by my first husband in my home in front of my children in June. My husband knows that June is a rough month for me. So, and he's got it in his calendar where he is asked, can you come up with around what time of the year are these things coming up for you? So my husband is extremely, extremely patient. He is willing to figure out what my triggers are, and he listens. And so for me, I don't know that I have necessarily dealt with the triggers as much as my husband has catered to my triggers. He's there for me, so it's, I know that they're there, but he is very aware of them. So he is very careful to not trigger those triggers. And he is not walking on eggshells. He is just being compassionate and caring. And that doesn't mean that in the month of November, he doesn't bring to me things that we may disagree on. We're not avoiding situations. We are just being there for each other and understanding that the month of November is rough for me. So if you tell me that the coffee isn't hot enough, I may blow up at you, because make your own dang coffee then. And that's not normally my response. So he would never complain about the temperature of coffee, but it was a bad example.
Yeah, I honestly believe, for me, um, triggers have been to release. Like that's one thing for me. What used to be my getaway was always going to school. So every time I was having an incident, I would go back to school, get another degree. It was like I had an outlook. But now I'm like, I can't go to school no more. I'm not doing that no more. And I haven't picked up a book since 2013, gratefully. And I think it's because I haven't been in an abusive relationship since that time frame. And so it's like nothing. That's the thing. When you start seeing yourself, repetitively doing something that just you're forcing yourself to do, that's a trigger. And I'm truly grateful for my husband for allowing me to release. And like he when instead of when I'm having some issues or having a situation, he just lets me get it out. And he comes and he say, "You done? You ready to talk now?" And he's just like that peace. He's like truly my peace and understanding, because he was just on, it seemed like he was somewhere on a little branch just waiting. Oh, I'm just waiting on her to hurry up and come on over here. Because he literally stalked me, I think, for about 10 years. But that's a whole other story for another day. But it's grateful to see it. And so if you do have situations that trigger you, both of us, both of me and him both agree our peace is in music. So we'll play music, play a song, get understanding. But in these situations, what he told me to do, even before we fully kind of got committed in a relationship, he said, you need to make peace with these situations. So I had to go back literally before he proposed to me, and I didn't even realize like this is what was the plan was. So I literally had some time sat down to have a conversation with my ex-husband. He was incarcerated, but I had to write it out and get it out and build a conversation. But in the same story, he, still became better at who he was, apologized, and we moved on. I finally had to sit down with the guy that I met in church, and about he apologized for the things he did. We apologized for the things we did to each other. And so when we can see each other now, it can be of understanding. My first relationship, the abusive relationship, we literally were at a homecoming one year. And one of my classmates was like, "Hey, what you call it with me? Is it okay for him to come stay in a room with y'all? Because I know you got a suite and we don't got nowhere to stay." I was like, "As long as he don't start no mess, we good." And like in that night, he was like, he thanked me for letting them stay because they was, everybody had all the rooms was booked up by the school. And he had a conversation with me about everything that went on, and we made peace. We hugged for the first time in 5+ years. And he was just like, I was very thankful for your friendship. I just didn't know how to be prepared for a woman that you are. And you're going to be, he just expressed great things in my spirit, like to where if he would have been this great person years ago, he probably would have been great. And so that's what, like, in some cases, like for us as divorced and have kids possibly with our exes, like just having that relationship now and can co-parent or do whatever we need to do, that's the release we need, because it'll help with any triggers, because if we don't release any of that energy that we had, then we're still triggered. Everything triggered. Like it used to trigger me when Thanksgiving came around, and I'd be like, it's that time when he busts my head open. I'm not celebrating Thanksgiving, but now I'm in the kitchen cooking all day, having a great time. It don't trigger me no more because I've made peace. I've released it. And so that's what I feel like as we should do as women or men in order to have triggers. It's best to get the assistance we need, whether it's counseling. Counseling is great. I'm gonna speak for my sisters and brothers. As African American men and women, we think counseling is crazy. Mm-hmm. I don't know who came up with the idea. I don't know who came up with the idea. Like they said, I'm not going to marriage counseling. I'm not going to no kind of counseling. I'm not marrying you if we don't go to marriage counseling. So I don't understand how all these people married, but now I understand how all these people divorced.
Right.
Because you didn't have marriage. You didn't understand the triggers, the issues, the misconcept of life. And so that's how we got to handle these conversations and situations. We got to deal with the issue itself. And so having those conversations will help us release, and definitely it's been a lot peaceful just to not have triggers at all.
I think the, where it came from in our community is the, what happens in this household stays in this household. You don't tell nobody what's going on outside this house.
And that's why most of us have been molested.
Exactly.
Right there.
I was just about to say that's why those things happen. And you just be quiet and don't say what your uncle did or what your cousin did, or whatever the case may be. And then you end up growing up, and then you get into these adult relationships, and then you don't tell nobody that you're being abused because you lived a whole life of secrets where nobody has to know about these things. But you did make a point about, when you're having kids with this person, and then, growing into being able to be co-parent when you deal with those things. My question for the ones of you that had kids with the people, and that your kids were actually involved or may have been involved, how did you deal with that? How did you deal with helping your kids to work through that? Sometimes they're young and they don't necessarily remember, which is a good thing. But sometimes, if they're a little older, I've had it where, my oldest son, when his dad hit me in front of him, he was 1. He doesn't remember that. So we got out of that situation. But then, my other son, even seeing the verbal abuse that was happening to me, and not being able to leave my house and having to call the police, he was standing right there through the whole thing of watching his mother be talked about and stuff. And so I've had to talk with him over and over again. And if y'all hear him in the back screaming, I've called his phone 7 times, but he got his earplugs on and he cannot hear nothing except for this video game. So he's screaming at his friends. So, but how do you help your kids work through those things, and or working through, if you don't associate with that person anymore, working through, this is why, we don't associate because of the abuse that happened, and you're trying to keep your kids safe? I know I give little questions.
Oh, I got my children into counseling right away. It was something that I couldn't go to counseling for in the moment, but my kids went right away. Their father was involved with them until about 1.5 years ago. He was in and out. I guess it's been 2 years now, since 2019. He signed over his parental rights in 2019. But one thing about him was that he was an awful husband. But he was a really, really good dad to my daughter. He was physically abusive to both me and eventually my son. And my son was 5 years old. So my son was more affected by that relationship. My daughter was 3. She didn't remember a lot of it. My second marriage, my daughter remembers a whole lot more. She was the target of the emotional abuse. So she was into counseling after that second relationship. And my son now has that, I will never treat a woman the way that you were treated. I want to treat you the way that Matt treats you, which is my husband now. My son seems to have a very good head on his shoulders now. And I attribute that to him being in counseling so quickly. It wasn't just me talking to him about it anymore. It was no longer our secret. It was, you were allowed to talk about this. You were allowed to be honest. Things happened, and now we need to work through it. My daughter still very much has that struggle. She very much wants to fill that void. She seeks love in places that probably she shouldn't. Listening to Jasmine talk, I'm like, oh, that's my daughter. Oh, that's my daughter. So we continue to have that open conversation with her that this is not love. We talk to her about the unconditional love that God has for her, and that the labels that society and the world will put on her are things that are not accurate. And so she is still in counseling. She is still going through this. She is still dealing with all of it. Her father became abusive in the last several years that he was involved with her, where it was just very verbally abusive. So we have had to continue getting her into counseling, continue to tell her her worth, continue to encourage her to seek her worth, especially with God, because God does love us unconditionally. You don't have a void to fill. So that is one thing that, I mean, that is the biggest struggle it feels, is that my daughter is still very, very defined. It feels like the abuse is very much her identity still. So keeping that, I think counseling is just huge. The counseling and therapy and having her read the Bible to figure out her true identity. There's a book about children finding their identity and within God. They have it for adults and they have it for children. I think it's called Defined. But we have her reading that, and we sit and read with her so that she understands that she is not worthy of abuse. She deserves better. And I had to figure that out. Now I'm trying to pass that on to her.
Yeah. My children were small. Jaden was a few months, maybe a year at the most. She doesn't remember any of that stuff. And the same thing with my son. He doesn't remember any of that stuff that his dad did. My daughter has to deal with her own stuff now when it comes to domestic violence now. So, counseling is something that we are seeking to put her in. We've just got to get the sister there. But my children were too young at that time.
And I kind of want to speak on the developmental process of domestic violence, because we're talking about kids. So even though our children cannot necessarily recall the abuse that occurred, the trauma is still there. And I cannot remember the word right now. Chantel might be able to help me. But it is generational trauma that continues to occur. And even though we can't understand it, the trauma brain does remember these things. Even though they may not be able to say, oh, well, my mom was abused and on this day, they remember a portion of that. It is in their brain. So our fears become their fears. And it is very, very important to make sure that they do understand, even if they can't remember. And I know, Jasmine, you're doing this, making sure they understand they don't have to settle for abuse, even if they can't remember our abuse. It is still in the trauma brain. And even if you don't have children with your abuser, and eventually you do have children, that trauma brain is still there, that we are passing on. So continuing to talk about domestic violence and talking about self-worth and making sure that our children understand you don't have to deal with this. And these red flags mean something. Pay attention to them. Find the green flags, find the yellow flags, find the red flags. And that is your life. And this is how you proceed so that you don't become victims and survivors. Not saying there's anything wrong with victims nor survivors. We don't want our children to go through it. And we want to stop this generational thing that is occurring so that we can build a better society than what we had to grow up in.
Amen.
Subscribe so you don't miss next week's video.
That's what I wanted to say, because people think, oh, I made somebody hit me. No, you didn't make nobody do that. That person did that because of their own hurt. Hurt people. So it's okay. If you are going through that right now, you can get out. You can stop it now. You have more power now. And something else I'm hearing in the spirit too is I had an abuser tell me that like my family didn't love me, wouldn't nobody believe me, nobody wanted to hear. That is a lie out of the pit of hell, and they're telling you stuff like that to manipulate you and to keep you bound up in those situations. You run as fast as you can. You pick up the phone and dial whoever that you can dial.